Folks, I belong to a generation of people who have spent most of their, or not all, of their marriage life in their child-rearing years in a post-9/11 world. A post-9/11 world. And that means that these parents who, since they have been raising their children, all that they know in this world is not so much a time of peace, but a time of bombings, active shootings, other acts of terrorism or whatnot. And so if I was to describe that generation into one phrase, I would say it would be labeled as a generation of fear. And some of those fears are, well, they're well understood why. And then there's some fears that are just absolutely plumb crazy. And I got interested in those weird and crazy phobias, and this is what I found. Listen to this phobia right here. Umbrophobia. Do you know what that means? It means the fear of rain. Have you ever seen anyone who acts like they're going to melt if they get rained on? There you go. How about this one? Turophobia. Turophobia is the fear of, this person wouldn't survive in my house, but the fear of cheese. You know that there's people out there that are absolutely afraid of cheese. They're afraid of cheese. I know. I see that look, Miss Doris. I get it. I understand. I don't know what we would do in my house with the fear of cheese. There's some people in this group that also has a fear of cheese, though it has nothing to do with the dairy product or the texture of it. It's the fact that it is yellow. Yellow. That is xanthrophobia, and that is the fear of yellow. So if you have a fear of yellow, you probably should never consider being a bus driver. And then there's zombophobia. Zombophobia is the fear of falling asleep. Now, I'm pretty sure that both of my children suffer dramatically with this disorder in our home because neither one of them wants to sleep. But one of the newest phobias and one of the top phobias, and not just America, but all over the world right now, is this one right here, nomophobia. Now, you slow that down a little bit, nomophobia, and you will almost hear this, no-mo-phone. You hear that? No-mo-phone. It is the fear of losing your phone, your cell phone. It's a fear of being dropped from a call or not having internet reception or things like that. Sometimes these are things that we now call blessings. Some people are absolutely afraid of. Listen to this. According to a recent survey, more than half the people in the UK suffer with nomophobia. And nomophobia is brought in by the fear of losing a signal, running out of battery life, or losing sight of your mobile device. Now, I can testify to that. There's been many times I've lost my phone, and your heart drops, right? When you figure out, like, man, where did I leave it? I mean, because they're expensive, right? And so it almost reminds me of that same feeling you get when your heart drops when you've been at church all day and you make it home, and then your spouse looks at you when you walk in the door and says, "Where's my children at?" And you're like, oh. Not that that's ever happened. Everybody got quiet. Actually, it did happen once, but at least I lived at the church, so all I had to do was walk 100 yards across the campus and pick my kids back up, and we made it back home. But there is one fear, guys, there's one fear that really gets to me, because this fear stops us from doing things that God has called us to walk in and things that God has destined for us to do. And that is this, the fear of failure. Now, I don't know about you, but there's been many times in my life where I have failed. I've attempted to do something that God has called me to do. I start walking that out, and when I walk that out, I stumble, I fall, I fail, and I end up feeling like a failure and end up in some kind of weird spiritual depression. It's happened. I mean, have you ever tried to start a Sunday school class or a small group or a home Bible study or anything like that, and either no one show up at all, or they show up once and then they never come back again because it was that bad? And then you end up feeling like a failure. If you haven't, I have. I've done that. I've started Bible studies and people come for about 2 or 3 weeks and it just dwindled down. And you end up feeling depressed because you say, well, God, I know that's what you wanted me to do. So where are you at? Why? Why am I not seeing the success that I thought I was going to see for being obedient and doing what it is that you've called me to do? Or have you ever spent your time praying for someone that God healed them, that God moved supernaturally and miraculously in their body, in their health, just for them to get worse? I have. Several times. I have prayed for people in times and seen God and his power just come and supernaturally heal a body. I've seen that. But I've also seen times where people just rather me never pray for them again because they gotten worse after I prayed. And so you think you're like, God, well, what do you want me to do? You've called me to do this. And then when we pray and nothing happens, and I go home feeling like a failure. Or maybe you have tried to share the gospel. Maybe you got up the audacity, I'm going to walk up to this stranger, I'm going to share my faith, and when you get there, you can't think of the words to say, and you leave wanting to stick your head in the sand, and you think, I'm never, ever going to do that again. I tell you that. Because I tried it, and it didn't work, and I failed, and we don't like failure. I've done that. I was a part of this group one time that would pray, and we would come together and we'd pray for 30 minutes, and we would just really ask for God's guidance. God, I want you to lead me to where you want us to go. And I remember praying. I remember having this overwhelming feeling in my heart. I'm not going to say I heard God's voice or anything like that. I just had this overwhelming feeling in my heart of a place that I was to go. And I went there. And in that overwhelming feeling wasn't just a place to go, but even the area of the store. And I got there, and sure enough, a young man was there, and as I approached him, and I got this big smile because I'm just overwhelmed at the power of God and what God has done and what God is actually using a failure like me to do. And as I approached the guy, he smiles at me, he says, man, you're about to tell me about Jesus, aren't you? And I said, yeah, how do you know? He says, because you're like the third person this week that's coming here with that same smile to tell me about Jesus. I was so overwhelmed that like, oh my, it's working. Like I'm doing what God told me to do, and God is showing up, and it's working. But listen to this. I was so filled with joy, I couldn't hardly tell the guy the gospel to save my life. And I left without even getting the guy's name or phone number to follow up or try to disciple the guy in any way. I was just so excited. And when I got home, I'm thinking, big dummy. I've done that. And I've walked in those times of failure. And chances are, so have you. But know this. If you are that person, I would rather be that person than the person that never does anything at all, by the way. But if you are that person, know that you are in good company. Take Bill Gates, for instance. Harvard dropout. You hear that? Harvard dropout. Co-owned this business that was a true failure just to turn around at the age of 31 years old and be America's youngest self-made billionaire. Or what about the name of Einstein? When you hear the name Einstein, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Intelligence. Great intelligence. Maybe another word that pops up in your mind would be, can I have that water, please? Would be genius. Thank you so much. The word genius would pop into mind when you think about this, but here's the fact about Einstein. Albert Einstein didn't speak to the age of 9. They thought something was wrong with the boy. Flunked math. But my goodness. He says this right here. Einstein says, success is failure in progress. And here's what I want you to take. As we open the Bible, as we look at these scriptures, I want you to know that failure is not always a bad thing, because most time it only precedes success. If you continue to get up and do it again. Let's turn our Bibles to John 6. Let's look at this, and I want to remind you as we dive into this verse today of last week. Last week when we examined the miracle of Jesus, and remember he was feeding 20,000 plus people here, 5,000 men, a woman for every man, and maybe 2 children, a family, and you're already at 20,000. But when you look at that, what we see is this gigantic event of Jesus feeding, miraculously, 20,000 plus people. But what we overlook many times is there's three smaller events that's taken place with these three characters. And we looked at those characters and we watched how each character responded to Jesus' testing. The first character we looked at was the character of Philip. Jesus asked Philip, where can we purchase enough food to feed all of these people? Now, Philip's answer was bad. He failed the test. Because he automatically says, well, we don't have enough money to feed all of these people, Jesus. He never for once stopped and thought, this is also the guy. The guy who's asking me, where are we going to get food, is the guy who just got finished turning water into wine. The proper answer was like, I don't know, but you probably got it covered. And then we look at the character of Andrew. And I love Andrew. Andrew is that come and see guy. He's always sharing his faith. He's always testifying. He's always dragging people to Jesus. And I love Andrew for that. But even Andrew fails the test because Andrew notices that of all the 20,000, there is one prepared person in the crowd. And so he looks at that little boy and he says, well, Jesus, there is a little boy and he does have 2 fish and 5 barley loaves. But then he fails in saying, but what is that? There's so many people here. What is that little bit going to do? But then there was the third person. The third person is the person that I would love to be. Because the third person here is this little boy. And by the way, don't we do the same thing Andrew does all the time? We do. I'll answer for you. You do. And I do. Every time that it seems that we get to that point where we're like, man, God could do this, but it's pretty big. It's pretty big. I don't know if he could get me through this situation. We're just like Andrew. But the little boy, he got it. The little boy didn't have much at all. I mean, literally 2 small sardine fish and 5 little barley loaves about the size of a cracker. But what he did was absolutely profound because what he did was put the little bit that he had in Jesus' hands. And this is what I really want you to get out of that. And I think they're going to put it on the screen for you today. Is this. You may believe, or what you have may be insignificant, while remaining in your hands. But it can be transformed into something magnificent whenever it's placed in the hands of Jesus. This little boy had very little, but that little become a whole lot when it got into the right hands. And that's exactly the outlook that you and I should have, even in our church. It could be that God's calling you to serve somewhere in this church, but you're like, I got so little to give, though. I don't have a lot of talent. I don't have a lot of time. I don't have a lot of resources. I don't have a lot of money. Any of these things. But what I do know is at the point that you finally give that little bit to God, he gives the increase, and it is him that makes that insignificant thing magnificent. And that's what I want to build off of today. Because once you start, you made up your mind and you said, you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to give the little I have and watch Jesus multiply it. Okay? When you do that, you better believe it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy at all. That is a false doctrine that thinks that once you hand your life over to Christ, once you start moving, then it's just easy peasy lemon squeezy. It's not going to happen, folks. It's tough. It's hard. And even sometimes, I would be bold enough to say that even sometimes it may seem to us that God has abandoned us on the battlefield, and listen to this, that he has called us to. You ever felt like that? God called you to a battlefield, and it's almost like he pure out abandoned you there. But this is what I want you to know, and this is what I want you to see today, that is so untrue, and that is such a lie from the pits of hell. Because as you're going to see today, though Jesus seems distant, he has never, not once in this event, taken his eyes off of his children. Look at verse 16. That was my introduction, so buckle up. When evening came, the disciples went down to the sea. Now, They went down to the sea and they got in a boat. Now, what I like is you can take the Gospel of Matthew, you can take the Gospel of Mark, and they give us one more little key phrase that I really like, and that is this: Jesus made them go get in the boat. Jesus made them get in the boat. Mark 6:45 says this: immediately, this is after immediately, he's fed the 5,000 men, plus all the women, all the children. They wanted to make him a natural king. Jesus wasn't going there because he knows man's heart. So he backs up, he retreats back to a mountain to pray. And it says immediately he made his disciples get into the boat. Jesus knew exactly what he was calling them to. If Jesus knows what's in our hearts, and Jesus knows what's in our mind, and has Nathanael who sit under the fig tree, and Jesus told him, you were sitting there under that fig tree. I know what you were doing. So he reads the minds of men and women. If he knows all of that, you better believe he knows weather patterns. You better believe that he knew that there was going to be a storm. Not to mention, it's at night. It's now dark, the scripture tells you. Now listen. I love me some Jesus, but if I was one of those old boys, and Jesus says, I want you to get in a boat, I want you to row across at night in a storm, I would probably be the one to be like, I don't know, Jesus. Like, this is a bold move. But they didn't. They jumped in. They're starting to learn. They're starting to have faith in Jesus Christ. And look at verse 18 as we see the storms become rough. It says this: the sea became rough because of a strong wind was blowing. So as if not the winds are bad enough, now the sea is starting to get quite hostile. And what we see here is the first time we see a storm, Jesus was in the boat. Jesus was in the boat on the first one. By the time that the second storm comes here, Jesus is not in the boat with them. Now, I don't know if you've ever been in some rough seas. I haven't. But now I can tell you this. Last year, we went fishing, deep sea fishing. And it was windy. And those waves was getting quite big. They were. And we sat at the front of the boat. What do you call that, guys? Boom, there. Bow. Smart. We sat up at the bow. And Brother Gaylord back there. Gaylord, would you stand up for us? Thank you, brother, because you are my hero. This brother sat at the very beginning. Thank you, man. You can sit down. This brother sat at the very front of that bow. And every time that boat would go in the air and it would just come crashing down, just this huge wave would come right over it. And it would just slap him, me, Elizabeth, Brother Ed was up there, Ben Lucas was up there. It would just slap us. I just got finished shaving my neck. I don't shave my face, but my neck. That salt water was stinging. It was burning. I was crying like a baby. Ed was crying like a baby. Elizabeth was laughing at us for crying like a baby. But that brother back there did not flinch. He was like Terminator. He did not flinch a bit. He took every wave that come over that boat. And I remember sometimes I would even stand up because I'm a walker. I love to walk a lot. I can't sit still. I fidget with things and stuff like that. So I'm just getting up and I got my hands on the rail, and every time that boat would come up, I would notice my feet would come up about that high. I would just hop with it. It was unbelievable. It was unbelievable. The rest of the Cowards crew was inside in the air conditioner at the time, so you guys get no props today for that. But you might have been smarter than us. But anyway, those seas was quite rough. And I couldn't imagine being on this little rowboat and thinking, what did Jesus get us into? Because I know that guy knew what was going to happen. Like, he's God. He's got this. So what is he doing? Now listen, it says that they rowed 3 to 4 miles. Look at verse 19. It says, when they had rowed about 3 to 4 miles, that's a lot of rowing, they saw Jesus walking on the sea, coming near the boat, and they were frightened. Now, I guarantee you these brothers are frustrated. Because listen to this. You get in and you start looking into this. What you learn from Matthew 14 is this is in the 4th watch of the night. That means by the time that these brothers had rolled this 3 or 4 miles, they had been rowing for about 8 straight hours. Talking about spinning your wheels, not getting anywhere fast. That's exactly what was happening. So you better believe that they're frustrated. But one thing about it that I've noticed in looking at this text is so much different from the last time that you've seen a storm is everybody's waking up Jesus. Jesus, you got to save us. Don't you care? We're going to perish. Jesus stands up. He goes out to the water and he speaks to the water. Peace, be still. Everybody starts asking questions like, what manner of man is this? Showing that there is no one on earth that can speak the water and winds and it calm. This time they're not even looking for Jesus. This time they're just rowing away. They're rowing. And they seem to even have this whole, we got this mentality. And how often do we feel in our frustration sometimes that, I'm doing exactly what you have called me to do. And you think in your mind, well, it's going to be easy. If Jesus said to go do it, it should be quite easy. He's going to make it easy. That's a false statement. It's a false ideology. Because that's how you're going to grow. That's how you grow. That's how you become more and more in the likeness of Jesus Christ. And when they see Jesus, in the other gospel of Mark, they thought that he was a ghost or a spirit. And it's so funny that even though they've grown so much, even though they've seen so much, there's still so much doubt in their hearts. Even though they got this, we got this attitude, we can make it on our own attitude. Jesus told us to do it, let's go. That's all the authority we need. We don't even need his help anymore. Let's just keep rowing. We're going to make it to the other side. They're not crying out for help. They're not saying, Jesus, save me. They're not saying any of that. They're just rowing, and they're getting nowhere fast. And it's so funny to me that they still have such doubt in their heart that they think that he is a ghost. And how easy to forget for us, every time that it seems like we come to this great challenge in life and we get down on our knees and we cry out to God and we're like, God, save me. And then God does save us. And then the very next time the waters get crazy again in life, what do? We forget. We forget that he was with us the last time. And so this time we think that, we're just totally abandoned out here in the waters of uncertainty of life. We do that. That's exactly what's going on here with their whole, we got this attitude. Because they're not even looking for Jesus. But this is the picture perfect illustration for exactly what we do when God calls us to do something. And then we say, yeah, I can do that. And you're so confident that you can do that, you just start rowing without his help. You just go with it. And I'm preaching to myself too this morning. Because there's been many times in my life where God said, I want you to go do this. And I say, you know what? I got this. I can do this. I've been prepared. I got it. I'm gone. And you do it, and then you start looking back and you start seeing failures in it, and you can't figure out what it is. And what it is you didn't take Jesus with you. You're working in your own strength. You're working in your own power. As the Apostle Paul said, I think it was, and forgive me, I think it was the Galatians, or the Galatians. He said, who has bewitched you? Because now they're starting to work back for their salvation again. And he starts talking like, if you started this thing by the Spirit of God, shouldn't you finish it with the Spirit of God? Listen, when you become saved, when you become born again, we've said this for weeks. That is you giving up on yourself and looking to the cross for salvation. But you know what you got to do the next day? You got to get up and look to the cross again. And you get up and you look to the cross again. Day after day after day. When your feet hit the floor, you take Jesus with you. Otherwise, you're walking in your own strength, trying to live out the Ten Commandments, trying to live out the Sermon on the Mount. Good luck with that if the Spirit of the living God is not in your heart, pushing you and steering you and just dwelling within you, living through you. But then Jesus says to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." In verse 20. I want to remind you of something that we often forget. In the Baptist world, I love the Baptist world for this reason. Man, we preach the gospel. We preach salvation. And we try to do it to the best of our abilities as clear as we can without fogging it up and without becoming logs to trip over and stumbling blocks. So Jesus did come to save. He did. He lived, he bled, he died, and he rose again. But part of that salvation, folks, is Jesus also rescuing his people from evil. I want you to think back. I think it's Acts 12. When Peter is doing exactly what Jesus told him to do, he's preaching the gospel. He ends up in prison. Now, I want to remind you that Brother James recently got arrested too. And you know what they did to James? Took off his head. They wanted to do the same thing to Peter. Politicians, people love it. We're going to do it again. So what happened? They go to cut the brother's head off, but the night before they cut the brother's head off, what happens? God sends a rescue. God sends an angel. Wakes up Peter, gets him dressed, and marches him straight out those gates. Here's the point. Sometimes you're a James, but other times you're a Peter. And God saves and God rescues. Let me tell you this. Jesus wouldn't turn a stone into bread when he was being tempted in the desert. Do you remember that? Remember the devil tempting him? You're hungry. You ain't eaten 40 days, Jesus. You could speak to that rock and it would turn into bread and you could eat it and problem solve. You've been waiting on God. You don't have to wait on God. Just do it yourself. You got this. And what happened? He would not do it. He would not do it for his own glory. But you know what he did do for his people that he loved? He took 2 fish and 5 barley loaves from a little boy and fed over 20,000 people. He's a rescuer in times of need. Let me say this. Jesus wouldn't cast himself off the pinnacle when Satan took him to the pinnacle of the temple to throw himself down. But you know what he would do? He would walk out into a stormy sea on top of the water to the people that he saw in distress. What is it about God's presence in our life is all we need? Have you ever noticed that? Anywhere in Scripture where the presence of God is, there's freedom. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Why don't we see that? Every time you are walking through a trial, a tribulation, a time where you're feeling like you're a failure, the quick, simple answer is the presence of God with you in your life, manifested with you in your life. Do you know what the number one command in the Bible is? It's not thou shalt not commit adultery. It's not thou shalt not lie or thou shalt not steal. Do you know what the number one command in the Bible is? Do not fear. Or do not be afraid. Did you know that? Over 300 times recorded in the Bible. Or some people says 365 times. That's one time for every day. You've heard that? We do know that Matthew tells us that Peter was in that boat and Peter wanted to go to Jesus. And when Peter got out of the boat, he took a few steps. You know what happened? What does it say? It says he sank. Jesus said, "Come to me." He okayed it. He told him, "Come on." He stepped out, but then he sunk. That's exactly how I felt so many times in my life. And I'm sure that if you was to be honest, You have felt the same way in your life when you just tried to do something from God. You step out of that boat because there's a lot of faith there. And by the way, if you're hurt because of that, bravo. Because you know who gets hurt in times like this? People who care. If you didn't care, if your faith in God wasn't even real, it wouldn't even bother you that you failed. I mean, just the sheer depression of the failure alone testifies to how much you believe God told you to do something. Faith in Him. Peter gets out, he sinks. This is what it says. Let me read it for you. Matthew 14. Peter answered him, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. And he said, come. So Peter got out of the boat, walked on the water, came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink. And he cried out, Lord, save me. And Jesus immediately reached out his hand, took a hold of him, and saying to him, oh, you a little faith, why did you doubt? And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and they was in the boat, worship him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. When did he sink? It says this, but when he saw the wind. You know why he was seeing the wind? Because he wasn't seeing Jesus. When you take your eyes off of Jesus to put it on whatever it is that you're living through, that you're going through, and you start focusing on that, you will sink. You know what I love about Jesus? He didn't say, oh, you a little faith, what is it like down there in the water? Is it cold? What did he do? He grabs him by the hand, and he picks him up. And if you think that that is bad, what else did Peter do in failure? He denied the Lord. Do you remember that? He denied the Lord. When he denied the Lord, you better believe this brother was in some spiritual depression. You better believe he felt like a failure. Because remember, it was him that Jesus brought out and said, hey, listen, Peter, you're a rock, and on this rock I'm going to build the church. You're going to go preach. Or when he said, Jesus, Peter, do you love me? Yeah, Jesus, I love you. No. Do you love me? Yeah, Jesus, I love you. Peter, do you love me? Jesus, you know I love you. Then go feed my sheep. The same exact Peter has now denied Christ. He's supposed to be the preacher to Jerusalem, and he's going to deny Christ? This is the brother who's going to get up on the day of Pentecost and preach to 3,000 people, and they're going to turn to Christ. And yet he's denying Jesus. And you better know that Jesus knew that because he told him that. And you better know that Jesus knew how that was going to affect Peter. Because when Jesus showed himself on his resurrection, what did he tell the ladies to go do? Go tell my brothers. Go tell my disciples that I'm risen. And what did else he say? And who? Peter. Called him out by name. Why? Because he needed that. He needed that. It says in verse 21 that immediately the boat, when Jesus stepped in it, the boat immediately was at land where they were going. Does Jesus want you to work hard? Absolutely. But he don't want you to do it in your own strength. Immediately, when they put their eyes on Jesus, and he steps into that boat, which they said, it said, and this just made me laugh, it said they was gladly pulled him in the boat. When they did, immediately it's on land. Immediately, problem was solved. But this is what I want you to get in closing. This is what I want you to get. Because when I saw this is something that changed my life a few years ago when I was struggling with failure, knowing that I know that God told me to do this, so why is this outcome the outcome that I'm seeing? Why isn't this prospering? I'm checking myself. Is the right things being said? Or are we preaching a Christ-centered message? Are we doing this? Listen, this right here helped me more than anything else, and I want to share it with you. I want to read you the same beginning of the event out of a different gospel. The Gospel of Mark, chapter 6, verse 48, I want you to write this down. I want you to mark it in your notes. I want you to read this anytime you need this. In Mark, he says this, Because we always say that Jesus is watching over you. And we almost don't even believe it anymore. It's like we just say it as this nice little cliche that no one even believes, like we're just hardened to that type of talk. But look what happens here. Immediately after the 5,000 was fed, he made his disciples get into the boat. He told them to go into that storm. He knew what it was going to do to them. He says, go before me to the other side to Bethsaida. Now listen, while he dismissed the crowd, look what Jesus does. After he had taken leave of them, Jesus went up on the mountain to pray. When evening came, the boat was out on the sea. This is where these brothers are just rowing, and wave after wave after wave is just crashing into their boat. They're just still just rowing their little heinies off. They've only made it 3 to 4 miles. They've been rowing for 8 hours straight. And I bet they're thinking, man, where in the world is Jesus when you need him? And look at this. The boat was out to sea. He, that's Jesus, was alone on the land, and he saw that they were making headway painfully. Jesus is on the land, he's standing on a mountain, and he is watching his people the entire time. Never once did his eyes stray from his beloved children. Not once. And it says that he recognized that it was painfully to them. They're just rowing and they're not making any headway, and it's full of pain. And he knew what was against them, for the wind was against them. The entire time of your struggle, of your feeling of failure, there's not one time that Christ has ever took his eye off of you. Not once. He knows exactly what is going on. He is monitoring at all times. So every time that I felt that I was walking in failure, he was there. He was watching. You see, we say this little saying all the time, that God will never put more on you than you can handle or whatever. That's good, but it's not in the Bible. What is in the Bible, 1 Corinthians 10, is God won't let you be tempted beyond what you can handle. He'll save you. What is in the Bible is the Lord's Prayer. And inside the Lord's Prayer is lead us not into temptation, but what? Deliver us from evil. I believe that. I believe that the entire time that they were there, that Jesus was seeing them, and he is going to deliver them from evil. Because according to Romans, you as a believer are more than conquerors. Or, back to the church again, the gates of hell shall not prevail. But not everybody in trouble wants to be saved. And that's the problem. And Jesus doesn't force the rescue. Jesus is just walking on the water, waiting for them to say, okay, we can't do this. We can't. Peter's like, I don't even want to try anymore. My arms are like butter. Just let me walk to you and I'll just hang on to you. And that's the sad thing, is not everybody cries out for that help. Because that's what Jesus is doing. He's crying. He's waiting for them to cry out that he can save them. But my prayer for you this morning is that you will not do that. If you're here this morning, you don't know Christ, you don't have a relationship with him, you're not following Jesus, it is my prayer that you will not continue living so stubborn and headstrong to thinking that you have this, because you do not. You don't have this. None of us have this. In fact, that is the difference between the sinner and the saint. The difference between the sinner and the saint is the saint has already threw in the towel that I can't do this on my own. Nothing in my hands I bring, simply to the cross I cling. It means I have no good work inside of me that's going to buy my way into heaven. By the things I do, by the things I do not do, none of that. Self-righteousness of the devil. Thinking you're holier than thou, of the devil.